we're getting to the point where I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be $1 billion business with one employee. But that being said, that person is probably extremely sophisticated in using AI. So it is a different, but yes, it is definitely becoming more accessible. But to your point, I think the more people you have right now and the more data is being created, the better it can be.
Tyler, great to be introduced to you. And I'm excited to have this brief conversation here on LinkedIn. Tyler Hochman, founder, CEO of FORE. They are AI solution architects building data pipelines for everything between startups and Fortune 500 companies. And we're going to have a cool conversation here about data and how companies can understand how to integrate data with AI. Because I think we have an idea. People are, we're coming along on how AI can be utilized in our companies. I've had a number of guests on the podcast over the last few months talking about, utilizing private data with AI and how companies can be doing it different ways. A lot of really cool case studies, but I think that everyone's still swimming in this ocean of, okay, how do we do this? So why don't you give a quick summary on what is FORE, and then let's dive into this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for having me on, Lee. This is really, really excited to be able to have this conversation with you. So we started FORE about 4 years ago.
Yeah, there you go.
But so when we started FORE, we initially created a very cool workplace retention solution that could forecast turnover and subsequently recommend targeted intervention strategies based on those core underlying reasons for turnover. It was a really, really cool, interesting algo. And then as a result of that, we built this really interesting ingestion pipeline, which is essentially a pipeline to take in data from a variety of different sources. At the time, it was, everything from census information to schedule adherence. And so you have to, match up with a lot of different software providers and different APIs. So we built this cool ingestion pipeline. It structured and streamlined and formatted the data. And then it outputted the data in such a way where our algos could go and create the forecast and the recommendations. What was interesting, and so we had a varying degree of success with that. What was interesting about it is that if a lot of our clients were actually getting hung up on that ingestion layer, what was ultimately necessary to go and produce the really cool AI generated outputs that we were creating as it related to workplace turnover, and then ultimately the chat interface and all those different kinds of things. They themselves didn't understand and also didn't have that ingestion layer necessary to do that. And so we kind of swam downstream a little bit and really started doubling down on making sure that people understand the value of private data, how to, where all their private data is, how to ingest it, how to structure and format it, and then ultimately how to produce all these really cool AI outputs and enable all these AI tools. But I think there was definitely and continues to be a little bit of a gap there where we're being told all this, and understand really the value of AI, or begin to understand it at least, but don't fully understand the data and how the data has to be structured and formatted necessary to enable that.
Okay, so let's go back one step. What the original kind of solution you're bringing to market sounded really cool. I haven't seen that yet. So talk a little bit about that. And are you still pursuing that? Are you still working on that with clients? I know you found this other problem that has to be solved, but.
Yeah, we do still have that solution. There are a couple clients that employ it. We've definitely expanded. So that's it was a very cool solution. We were forecasting, and still remains to be a cool solution, forecasting turnover anywhere between 3 and 9 months before it would happen, based on all these different input variables. And then given the core reasons we believe that turnover was occurring, we would then recommend targeted intervention strategies over a degree of prices and time that could prevent that employee from turning over.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fun. A quick, easy tidbit is that the lowest cost way, and we recommend it every time, honestly, regardless of the reason someone is going to turn over, is recognition. If you just recognize an employee, they are 3 times less likely to leave. with large companies, it's hard to figure out which employee to recognize. And so that's where the forecasting algo really helped. But beyond that, yes, if you just know who's going to leave or who thinks they may leave, or even before they may know they'll leave, and you can target that person and just recognize them in a very vocal and outspoken way, it'll really help them from leaving.
Yeah, super interesting. It's almost like you're taking, some modern technology that could be utilized maybe in an insurance field, or I'm thinking of a specific use case of like a car dealership where they know when your lease is up, so they can, target you for a new car or something like that. And you're applying it to the human. Well, an old like enterprise wording would be human capital, right? Like, I think that's such an interesting play. Was there anybody else already doing this out there?
There were a couple young startups as well. I don't think they did the forecasting side of it like we did. Obviously, the intervention side moves more towards consulting. I think what was cool about our intervention strategy is that we had a really interesting feedback loop. And so we could actually measure the effectiveness of recommendations in a really quantitative way. That was a little bit differentiated. But on the forecasting side, yes. And funny enough, actually, a lot of our team at that time came from finance and hedge funds. And so they were applying the same forecasting algos that you would use to forecast stock performance to people.
That's shocking. Well, okay. So give me an example. Like, what does that look like in the real world? As I could, these kind of things, and as where we are with AI too. I mean, it can get dark really quickly, especially when you're applying to human, performance. Give me an example of how this played out in a positive way.
Yes. So what's interesting is that we actually always, our software, at least in how we, every tool could be used in a variety of different ways. You try to put as many safeguards as you can to prevent it from being used negatively, but it is still a tool at the end of the day. But our inception and how we advocated the use of it was that it would forecast employees who would leave. And now, you would obviously be able to see the range of those employees. So you may decide, the underperforming employees you just want to let leave, right? In the middle to high performing employees you'll want to retain, but it'll forecast that they're going to leave and then offer you targeted interventions to prevent them from leaving. And so what that would look like in the real world is, common examples of turnover include like low utilization rate, high burnout rate, misaligned, variability in schedule adherence, or anything from like your commute is too long and the variability of your commute relative to your working hours is mismatched. We had like hundreds of input variables. And so we would just, and then you could obviously filter by performance. And so you could see kind of your top performing to middle performing to low performing individuals, what they are, their forecasted turnover status was anywhere from very low, medium, high, and very high. And so it would update on a monthly basis. And so you could see, someone just actually graduated from medium to very high. I should intervene now. And that was the basis for it. And then we'd offer those targeted intervention strategies. Everything from recognize an employee was the lowest cost, lowest time solution to a high cost, low time solution is just pay them more to a low cost, or a medium is that like, change up their schedule, offer vacation incentives, all those different things.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's such an interesting thing. And I could see how this would be it would be utilized very heavily with bigger organizations with lots of employees. Obviously, there's a lot of data there. How do you create a control? I mean, do you just go into a company and just look at all their data solely, or are you looking at other companies' data? I mean, to the extent you can, or historical data, and creating a control based on external?
Yes, it's a great question. So we had two solutions, or we have two solutions. One is a publicly facing solution. So we can use public data about the company And it's not as sophisticated or accurate as the private solution, but just based on like census information, a whole bunch of different things. Actually, very similar to how like ChatGPT learned initially, right? It's like all this publicly available scraped data, and so that would form our kind of form our control group or our base group, so to speak, and then we can overlay that with private data. And we are very clear not to use companies' private data to train against other companies' private data unless given explicit permission. So most of the time, the base group is just the public data, and then it's tuned via the private data.
Yeah, I would think that it would be hard because you'd go into one company culture operating a certain way, like as they say, unlimited vacation and work from home, hybrid. Like there's so many variables that go into what makes up a company culture and why someone would stick. Again, you still have this like core human element of people like to be recognized, right? That's always there holding you maybe as an anchor. But how do you go from one environment to the next and find the baseline?
It's and to that effect, was most effective when you had at minimum 50 employees doing the same job. And so we would almost create the baseline every time, and you had to have a large enough sample group to both test and train. And so that's why we couldn't really do it for like C-suite executives, because they're one-offs, or really it would kind of become less accurate the higher you would go on the organizational chart.
That makes sense. Okay. That's super cool. I mean, I hadn't heard of that. And I think that's really cool to have that out in the marketplace, and cool that you guys are working on it. So now we're talking about private data. Give us a framework and this problem of like, a lot of people know about starting to use AI and that kind of thing, but how do you actually use your private data? Give us maybe like a framework for thinking on how to utilize private data and public data. Like how do these companies start working towards making this a solution?
Yeah. It's funny you just mentioned that you haven't heard that problem before, because my head of media tells me to lead with that because it's a lot more cool and sexy than how to format and structure private data.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that
and then one leads to the other. Yeah.
I'm glad we had the fun, and I'll try to keep this still interesting. I think it's interesting, but and I'll try to make sure it's not dense, but yes.
I think it's interesting because there are a lot of companies that are forward-thinking companies, right? Let's say you're 20% of your market, maybe 15% of your market, that are actively working on. They're working every day to utilize, even if it's just ChatGPT. They're trying to figure out how to use AI because they see that there's an opportunity to leverage it there, but they only know what they know because they don't have time to really go and research it and hire developers to tell them and learn while they're telling them. So I think that there's a eagerness to learn, and I think that is enough for people to stay tuned in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And let me describe a problem that's typical of a lot of our current clients. They actually do some degree or listen to podcasts of research on AI. They hear very cool AI tools and AI outputs. They may even go and try a couple themselves, try ChatGPT, get an enterprise package for ChatGPT, try all these, point solution AIs for analyst workflows or chatbots. None of them really deliver the solution they want. They're okay. They're not worth the time. The ROI is hard to actually quantify. And as a result of that, they either become a little bit discouraged, or they say, let me wait and see until the solutions get better. And so that is a problem that a lot of our clients face. And what we do is, that problem is based on, and I know, and I've watched some of them that a couple of the other people who've come on the show before have talked about, a lack of private data being used to tune those models, and that that AI to actually become performance enhancing for that business, and then the question is, okay, you need to use the private data. How do you use it? What is actually the APIs and the sources of data you need to connect to? How much of that do I need to provide? How do I provide that in a secure way? Once I provide it, then where does it go, right? How do I align timestamps? How do I structure and format it in such a way where the, tools can accept it in a readily, easily accessible way? And like I was joking before, we like to use AI within our ingestion engine to then support an AI product.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so give us a little bit of behind the curtain. How does this work? I mean, I think that's what people are sticking around for is, what can they take and make some progress with today?
Yeah. So I'll kind of describe a couple cool use cases that we use it for. One of them is for a sports franchise. And again, this probably doesn't apply to most people, but it's a cool use case. Is that
sure.
We a lot of sports franchises record video. So they, record practices and games, and even as like a parent to a child, like you may do that for them. They have some analytic overlay on top of that. So they, maybe even take notes, right? They're taking down the number of shots, and, they have some type of analytic overlay, and, maybe a couple different sources of data in there, anything from your Apple Watch that's recording some biometric information. So you have all these disparate sources of data. And so the first question is, can you synthesize them and put them in a data lake in a unified way, right? Timestamp everything, get everything to match up, get everything, to read similarly. And then once you do that, you can actually feed it. And we do it very explicitly. We feed it into Gemini, because Gemini is probably the best LLM right now to intake video data, in my opinion. And then you can interact with that. So then you can ask it questions. So then you've ingested all these really cool sources of data, and now everything from analytics to actual video footage. And so you can ask questions. How many, in a basketball example, right? How many 3-pointers were shot, during this session? What was the make rate? What was the miss rate? What was the distance to the basket? You can kind of, show me clips, show me individual examples, and it can pull clips. And that's kind of, a cool sports example.
Yeah. And you could, that's probably level one, where you can ask of it. That's almost like a Google search of the information. But then you could probably go deeper by, effectively chatting with your data, right? And asking it more complicated or more complex problems, right?
Yeah, you can, in terms of the ask feature, I think it can get very complex. Yeah.
Okay. So then what I'm hearing is step one is figure out what data you have out there as a company. Just identify, label it. And then it's about getting that data, building pipelines of getting that data to a place where AI can digest it or ingest it. That's like step 1 and 2, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good
from an
general
infrastructure standpoint.
Yeah, from it, absolutely. From it. And the other cool thing is that AI itself can help you with that, right? And so you can feed AI the mapping of what you want the data to look like. And then, and previously this was actually a massive problem. It was a massive parsing problem, because you had to figure out how do you, although you could do some much less sophisticated mapping, then how do you parse the document to actually recognize when these instances appear and then adjust them to the new mapping schedule? AI does that entirely for you now. And that's actually, I think, one of the best leverages of AI, which is AI is going to do and continues to do very cool things, in my opinion. And again, this is a nerdy opinion, but the best leverage of AI is actually in structuring and formatting data, because it was so hard to do before. And now you feed it a simple mapping algorithm and it goes and maps everything.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So again, I'm the layman here, so I'm asking some dumb questions, but it makes me think of cloud computing or, cloud storage, and how after not too long, we all realized that it's actually not a cloud. It's just a bunch of servers, right? That are not in my office. And so it's like kind of funny, because AI, machine learning, it depends on who you talk, who has worked on it directly, whether it's developer or technical people, and how invested they are and the angle they're coming out, or solution they're providing. It seems you get a spectrum of people with passion in one way or another, right? Well, some people want to oversimplify it and say it's really just if then, it's machine learning. It's stuff we've been doing for years and years, but now it's rapidly evolved because of the data set. And then you have people that are like, oh no, this is magic, right? This is, there's no way you can understand it. It's like mysticism. And so I think that a lot of business owners out there, if they were honest with their question, would say, how difficult really is this? Is it simply we have to identify the data, And then we have to identify how to get access to it, meaning do we email it to ourselves, or do we put it in a Google Drive, or do we have it, and is it just a bunch of APIs that are connected to one another? And then once AI realizes that they can replicate that infrastructure, or is it some like third or fourth level, dimension that is like, oh no, it's way more complicated than that?
Yeah, I think it's such a good point that you're bringing up, because I think there are, I can't remember what song it was, but it's like there are levels to it.
Yeah.
Like there really are. There are levels. Are levels to it.
Yeah.
And it depends.
You're probably talking about a Beach Boys song.
Maybe that's what it is.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like the perfect song.
Yeah. And yes. And so I think it depends on your use case, and what the ROI is that you're looking for it. On an individual level, I think in terms of like, let's say a summarization and an interacting with document capacity, I think you actually can use out of the box solutions pretty well. Like you can go to ChatGPT. Now, there's a question to be asked here, which is, are you okay from a security standpoint, especially if it's, your private information, uploading it to a public LLM? To that effect, we actually have a number of clients that we build private LLMs for, because that is a huge concern for them. But assuming that is not a concern for you, or the amount of information is going to stay relatively small, I think from a summarization interacting with the document standpoint, you don't need to do what I'm describing. Like you can really just go and upload, as an example, I do it too with contracts. Like I'll go and upload a contract to ChatGPT and I'll just ask it to summarize it, identify key things, stuff like that. That's kind of level one in my mind. Level two is, okay, you're trying to, and that's the way we describe it is like, that's a productivity tool. Now you're looking for more of your magic box tool, right? Okay. You want it to actually think like you and then produce a output that you would have otherwise produced. And I think that requires a decent amount of training and tuning on top of base models. And in order to do that, that's when you have to start feeding it private data. And so there's obviously, there's obviously still within degrees. I think you're 2, 3, 4 of the same bandwidth. But yes, that is where, and I'll give you a couple examples. Like one, we work for we have a real estate client, and that client wants us to produce outputs that compare essentially when they get different real estate property opportunities, they want to analyze them in the same way that their CEO does. So almost building like an agent of the CEO, and then produce their, memos and their reports based on how he would have done it. And so exactly. So I think that takes a ton of private information, because we're essentially learning his, diligence process. So one, he doesn't want that going to a public LLM. Two, you have to then train on that information. You need a true set, which is the reports he's previously produced that we use to train it against the diligence information. And then three is you have to actually output it in a way that it's similar to the way he would do it. That's pretty hard to do just on a public LLM. And so that would be more involved.
It requires more of that relevant data, which is private. So then on a very, very practical level, if I have a company that is, let's pick a number, 10 million in revenue, it's a kind of small to mid-size company, and we're looking at this problem. We're like, okay, how do we leverage AI? If our data is not super security rich, meaning we're okay with this being part of the public, then a ChatGPT or a Gemini is perfectly fine to get started. And they could really start with those two steps of identifying the data and building pipelines to start learning what they don't know, really, right? I mean, just building the data so that they can start somewhere, because that seems to me is you almost have to build this conversation or this pool of data that you can have a conversation with. And until you have the data that is good coming in, you really can't get to that next level of mystical analyzation, right?
Totally. And most of our clients, to that exact effect, working with us is not their first interaction with LLMs and using AI. Like it's that they've been trying it themselves, or they tried a couple out of the box solutions and it didn't deliver enough for them. and or they couldn't themselves figure out, okay, I see it's getting, 60% of the way there. I'm uploading, I think, all the data I have, or I'm uploading it in a specific way, and it's still not getting me there. Maybe it's time to bring in, some experts. Yeah. So that's when we come.
And those companies are typically going to have more data to start with. That's why they're already down the road. I mean, even if you just look, we talk a lot about B2B, but you look at a lot of, B2B can be manufacturing, and there's a lot of technical data that could be already streaming, but B2C, you're going to have a lot more, front end data to pull from. But the bigger your organization is, the more systems you naturally have, which means the more information you have to pull from and start plugging into. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and we're definitely getting, I think we're getting there, right? Like we're getting to the point where I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be $1 billion business with one employee. Yeah. Like we are getting to the point where people, but that being said, that person is probably extremely sophisticated in using AI. So it is a different, but yes, it is definitely becoming more accessible. But to your point, I think the more people you have right now and the more data is being created, the better it can be. It will, as it goes on, be able to just be smarter with less data. But right now, that's where we're at, I think.
Yeah, I've heard that before about the one person $1 billion company. But my question is does that person have a board of directors?
I can't speak to that, but if they do, I'm sure that they are less strict than my board of the directors.
That level of autonomy can never exist. It's just not possible. Someone's going to crush that.
I've never heard that tangential question, but I like it. And I'm going to say they do have a board of directors.
I mean, oh yeah, they got a board of directors. Hey, this has been a fun conversation. Thanks for coming on. And I know that audience has got a lot of value from it and pull some practical things out of here. I know I have myself. So thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And this is definitely something I love to talk about. And I hope I kept it interesting.
Yeah, you did. And if people want to come find you to figure out what employee they need to fire next for your FORE solution,
that's not why they go.
Oh, that's not how you describe it.
That's essentially not how we describe it.
Oh, okay. No. It's the opposite of which employees they should be keeping.
There you go. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, yeah, okay. I think people got that, or infrastructure, because infrastructure.
Yeah, and listen, we were, my previous point, it's a tool. It's not how we use the tool, but it is a tool, and so if that's how other people want to use it, at least you're getting some value out of it.
Yeah. That's right. Okay, cool. Well, I'm sure people connect with you on LinkedIn. If they want to connect with you directly, where do they go?
So they can go to our website, FORE enterprise, .com. And then there's a whole bunch of request forms. They can meet the team. They can see some of our case studies. And yeah, it's a great place to start.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Tyler. This is great.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Lee.